Hello and welcome to Political Science 101, and we're talking about federalism today, Chapter 3, and this is a chapter on federalism. The learning outcomes for today's chapter are to explain what federalism means, how federalism differs from other systems of government and why it exists in the United States, indicate how the Constitution divides governing powers into our federal system, summarize the evolution of federal-state relationships in the United States over time, describe developments in federalism in recent years, and explain what is meant by the term fiscal federalism. And our chapter begins with, can a state leave the Union? And yes, they can. Is one side of the debate if they want to, but they have to convince Congress. You cannot secede, just as South Carolina tried to on their own. And the other side of the argument is that is pure fantasy and folklore. It's based on law and that they can't do that. So, those issues in debate is, mostly around South Carolina, but also Texas as well. Texas is often referred to as, it is a state, but it acts like its own country. I think I can say that my grandmother actually was born in Texas, and definitely that's 100% true. Very independent type of people. But that's kind of our introduction to federalism. And what is federalism? Federalism is a system of shared sovereignty between two levels of government, one national and one subnational. So you have the national government and then you have the state government. And there's this shared power and they have to balance. And there's often, a fight to keep that balance. Okay. Alternatives to federalism, they went through those: the unitary system, centralized government, which local and subdivisional government exercise only those powers given to them by the central government; confederal system, a league of independent sovereign states joined together by a central government. So some differences there. Okay, on page 54, you have advantages of federalism. Experimentation. This is a really great portion that you really want to read closely because it talks about how state governments also have a wide variety of kind of leeway, and they end up being acting as laboratories for public policy. So, a governor of a certain state, oftentimes you hear about this. I know Mitt Romney did a lot for his state in Massachusetts, and kind of made it like a laboratory to bring certain social programs that the whole country could benefit from. Or different governors in California or other states all over that were did a very good job of balancing their budget, or something that was really wonderful. Then they can use it on the state level, and then it can move up to the federal or national level. So that really is a great point that they point out, the advantages of it. Okay. And then they talk about some more advantages, some drawbacks of federalism. Powerful state and local interests can block progress. There can be infighting and where there's not really a lot of working together, and that is an issue. All right, talks about Canada. That's very interesting on page 55. The constitutional division of powers, the powers of the national government, powers delegated to the national government, and they talk about the expressed powers. I'm sorry, do they have that first? Oh, division of powers is a basic principle of federalism established by the U.S. Constitution, which it's divided between state and national governments. So there's a divide. State government has this, federal government has that. Express powers, constitutional or statutory powers that are expressly provided by the U.S. Constitution, also called enumerated powers. All right, these are the power to coin money and to regulate interstate commerce. Constitutional amendments provide for these. Congress has the power for federal income tax as well. Then it talks about implied powers. Implied powers, the powers of the federal government that are implied by the express powers in the Constitution, particularly in Article 1, Section 8. It talks about all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying out into the execution and foregoing of express powers. All right. You have an elastic clause because it gives elasticity to our constitutional system and its interpretation of different laws. The necessary and proper clause gives Congress the power to make all laws necessary and proper for the federal government to carry out its responsibility. And that's called the elastic clause. Inherent powers. The powers of the national government that, although not always expressly granted by the Constitution, are necessary to ensure the nation's integrity and survival as a political union. So that's inherent powers. And then you have the police powers, which are usually the powers for the state. Government body that enable it to create laws, protection of health, safety, welfare, and morals of the people. In the United States, most police powers are reserved for the states. Okay. I love this quote by James Madison. The great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place, oblige itself to control itself. All right. You have your concurrent powers, powers held by both the federal and state governments in the federal systems, and those are the ones that there's a tug of war over. Supremacy clause of the Constitution, which makes the Constitution and federal laws superior to all conflicting state and local laws. So it is the highest in the land. And I love the graph on 59 because these definitions get confusing. But if you look at the graph on page 59, it has the national laws listed. It has the state laws listed, or their responsibilities, and what they share in the middle. I love this Venn diagram. It's wonderful. And you have the powers denied by the Constitution listed with the national, concurrent, and the state. All right, so that's pretty interesting. The national government can coin money, conduct foreign relations, regulate interstate commerce, to declare war. The state of Ohio cannot declare war, neither can the state of Kentucky. To raise and support the military. You cannot have your own private state military. To establish post office. Again, the national government. To admit new states. To exercise powers implied by the necessary and proper clause. Okay, so then we're over at the state. What is granted by the Constitution for states? To regulate intrastate commerce, to conduct elections. Okay, so they're in charge of elections. To provide for public health, safety, welfare, and morals. To establish local governments, to ratify amendments to the federal Constitution, and to establish a state militia. Okay, but it has to be under the national government's overseeing and rules following that. Okay, the powers that they are, concurrent. You need to do the ones that they share in the middle. Both can levy and can collect taxes. Both can borrow money. Both can make and enforce laws. Both establish courts. Both provide for general welfare. Both can charter banks and corporations. Powers denied by the Constitution. The national government cannot tax articles exported from any state, violate the Bill of Rights, change state boundaries without the consent of the state in question. What a state cannot do, it cannot tax imports or exports. It cannot coin money. Kentucky cannot have its own type of money that they want to do apart from the rest of the federal government. It cannot enter into a treaty with France. Kentucky cannot, neither can Ohio. To impair obligations of contracts, to abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens, or deny due process and equal protection under the law. They cannot deny people equal protection. And you know, if you study the Black Codes, you know that the southern states did this quietly and no one really said anything. And when it was brought to the federal government's attention, the National Guard was called in and it was taken care of. But that's where the national government, is above the state and can change that. Both, what they cannot do, powers denied by the Constitution, to grant titles of nobility. And that's something we really don't understand in America, because in England, it's still very powerful. Your nobility in your office, if you know the story of Princess Diana, her mother was not given custody because her father was nobility. And that was a huge portion that played, and that was in the 1970s. 1960s, and it would have been 1970s. So nobility played a huge role in England. Still has some, but with her death, she brought kind of a revolution of, more equality and not these titles and nobility and aristocracy. They both cannot permit slavery, neither the federal government or the state. They cannot deny citizens the right to vote. Okay, neither one are supposed to do that. There's a check and balance system. Okay, so let's continue. The struggle for supremacy continues through that, that struggle between of federalism. Have some court cases that they mention. Macaulay versus Maryland issue here. Involved the necessary and proper clause, when the state of Maryland imposed a tax on Baltimore branch of the Second Bank of the United States. He declined to declined to pay the tax, and the state court ruled that Macaulay had to pay it, and the national government appealed to the United States Supreme Court. Okay. You have the Gibbons and Ogden, that involved having a commerce license with the federal government or the state government. The federal government supersedes it. And of course, we know the Civil War was the ultimate supremacy battle of federalism, simply because South Carolina attempted to nullify some tariffs or to make them void, and they were not permitted, and they seceded. The southern states from the Union in 1860 and 1861. States' rights and slavery, dual federalism. Dual federalism is a type of federalism that existed before FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And dual federalism is a system of government in which the federal and state government maintain diverse but sovereign power. So very different powers, okay? Now, cooperative federalism came about with a crisis. The Great Depression came, and something bold, big, huge needed to be done. And FDR launched his New Deal, policies ushered in by Roosevelt's administration in 1933 in an attempt to bring the United States out of the Great Depression. So he had to kind of use the federal government to overreach its bounds in order to really pull the United States out of the Great Depression. And it was a time of crisis. Let's see, back on your cooperative federalism, a model of federalism in which the states and federal government cooperate in solving problems. And he really was good. FDR was very good at getting people to work together because it was such a desperate situation, and there were so many people homeless and starving, and nothing was working. All right, so that's what cooperative federalism is. We have preemption, a doctrine rooted in the supremacy clause of the Constitution. The national laws and regulations will take precedence. New federalism, a plan to limit or pull back the government after the New Deal. Devolution, the surrender of transfer of power to local authorities by the central government. What's interesting is I believe in one of your videos that you'll watch on Crash Course History, either Government and Politics or the U.S. history, I believe they'll say that Reagan really backed new federalism and really brought it to the forefront. But it is interesting to note that Reagan was a Democrat before he was a Republican. for several years, 15, 20 years, and he supported the New Deal, and then he shifted, and you can change your mind, and he wanted to pull back federalism.